welcome. It's wonderful to have you with us today. My name is Rizza. I'm a research fellow at the Institute for Sociology of the Slovak Academy of Sciences and one of the council members of the Early and Mid-Career Researchers of Social Networks, or EMCR. I will be your moderator for today's session, and I am very much looking forward to the conversation ahead. This webinar is brought to you by EMCR in collaboration with the Social Network Analysis Group of the British Sociological Association, or SNAG. We're really pleased to be co-hosting this event, and I think it's a great example of the kind of conversation both communities are here to foster. Um, we know that today's session is based on a paper recently published in Sociological Research Online. You can find the link in the chat box. The paper is entitled Social Categories and Boundary Making, Exploring the Potential of Interactive Visual Tools to Study Boundary Work Within Personal Networks. It presents a genuinely innovative methodological approach to studying how individuals draw social boundaries within their personal networks, and I think it will resonate with many of you here today. So the link to the full article is in the chat right now. It's open access, so freely available to everyone. I particularly encourage you to look it up if you're curious about the visual tools and how they were developed and applied in practice. So before I introduce our speakers today, just a few quick notes on how the session will run. So the presentation will be followed by a dedicated Q&A, but please feel free to engage throughout. You don't need to wait until the end. So you can drop your questions, reactions, or comments in the chat box at any point during the presentation. We'll be keeping an eye on it and we'll bring the most relevant ones forward during the Q&A. Or you can also opt to unmute yourself after the presentation and speak directly. So do keep that option in mind. All questions are welcome, whether they relate to the theory, the empirical findings, or how you might apply something like this in your own work. So we really encourage you to ask questions. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce today's speakers. First, we have Nuria Targarona Rifa. Nuria is a PhD candidate at the Department of Social and Cultural Anthropology at the Autonomous University of Barcelona and a researcher in the ERC-funded Patchwork Project, a network science approach to the social cohesion in European societies, where she studies ethnic boundary making in social networks. Her work uses mixed method social network analysis to explore processes of categorization and boundary drawing. And she has previously published in the Journal of Refugee Studies and Sociological Methodology. Welcome, Nuria. Presenting alongside Nuria is Professor Louise Ryan. Louise is Senior Professor of Sociology and Director of the Global Diversities and Inequalities Research Center at London Metropolitan University. She's the author of Social Networks and Migration by the Bristol University Press, 2023, and has edited several major collections, including Migrant Capital with Arella D'Angelo, with Palgrave Macmillan, 2015, and Revisiting Migrant Networks with Keskiner and Eve Springer, 2022. So please do check those remarkable works. She's currently leading a Nuffield-funded project on Afghan resettlement schemes across England, and her latest book, Irish Nurses in the NHS, An Oral History with Macpaulin and Doshi, from Four Courts Press 2025, is already a bestseller. Congratulations, Louise. Wonderful to have you here today. So I also want to warmly welcome Dr. Alejandro Cordia, the third author of the paper, who is joining us today as well. Alejandro is a postdoctoral researcher at the Maastricht Sustainability Institute at Maastricht University and at the Faculty of Political and Social Sciences at Scuola Normale Superiore in Florence. His research spans organized civil society, political participation, social movements, and socio-ecological transition, drawing on relational theories and mixed method social network analysis. His work has appeared in Sociological Methodology, Voluntas and Mobilization, among other journals. Alejandro won't be presenting today, but is very much here with us and may join in during the Q&A, so do feel free to direct questions his way too. Great to have you with us, Alejandro. Now, I'll hand over to Nuria and Louise. Over to you both.
Thank you. So Louise will start with the presentation. So I'm going to share my screen. So we can start with that. Is that okay? Everyone can see?
Yes, that looks perfect. Thank you, Nuria. And thank you very much to the organisers for supporting and facilitating this event today. And it's great to see so many people, 29 people in attendance. So on a sunny Friday afternoon, that's very much appreciated. So thank you very much. And as we've said, the paper is available, open access. So if you are interested, you can read the full article. So we have the title there. It's a very long title, Social Categories and Boundary Making, Exploring the Potential of Interactive Visual Tools to Study Boundary Work Within Personal Networks. And we'll be showing you some visual examples, some videos of the actual boundary drawing process in a little while. But first, I'm just going to start with an introduction. So as mentioned by Rizza in her very fulsome introduction a few moments ago, this project is actually embedded in an ERC project, the Patchwork project. And a particular focus of today's presentation is looking at social boundaries and how boundaries affect the kinds of relationships that we form with people. So how are our interpersonal relationships influenced by notions of boundary making, the kind of people we are like, people we are not so like, and how does that impact and manifest itself in networks? So how do individuals perceive social boundaries within their networks? But that is a topic that's actually very rarely been studied. And so what our method does is it tries to stimulate participants' narration of boundaries without biasing their answers, without putting words into their mouths. And that's actually a very challenging thing to do in research, especially in qualitative research, to ask those questions, but without so-called leading the witness, putting words into people's mouths, but nonetheless encouraging them to talk freely and openly about specific ties and how they perceive boundaries within the people within their network. And what we want to talk about today is how these tools, these visual tools, may help us to overcome some of those methodological challenges. Next slide, please, Nuria. So, as you know from the sociological literature, I'm sure you'll be familiar with this, social boundaries tend to separate people into so-called us and them. And we can go back to the pioneering work of people like Charles Tilly, for example. Boundaries display a categorical or a social dimension, and Andreas Wimmer has written about this. Social interaction across boundaries, therefore, can kind of create or reinforce a notion of insider and outsider categories, although, of course, we know that these can often be quite blurry and dynamic in different situations. And what's often interesting to consider, particularly in relation to migration research, is how formal, almost legal categories that operate within society can then influence how people's perceptions and negotiations of those categories work in their everyday interactions within networks. So we can think about formal legal categories such as refugee, asylum seeker, migrant, etc. And there's a very interesting paper which was published in 2023. Coincidentally, that paper was published by Scuzzarello and Morosanu around the time that we were drafting this paper. And by a very fortunate coincidence, Nuria and I were at a conference where we actually met Laura Morosanu and spoke to her about the article that she had co-authored and how that was impacting on our thinking in writing this paper. So in that article, they talk about how institutional actors, state actors, for example, draw boundaries from above, those kind of legal categories, but also how people, individuals, negotiate those categories from below, and what's the interaction between boundaries, categories that are imposed from the top, and how people perceive and negotiate those from the bottom up. Next slide, please, Nuria. So because all of this is methodologically quite challenging to actually research, as I mentioned earlier, without putting words into people's mouths, there's a need for an open and inductive methodological approach for studying this interaction of boundary work from above, those formal legal categories, and from below, and how they're perceived by individuals. Social network methodology allows understanding of these cognitive processes beyond these kind of generalizations of categories by looking at how egos, how individuals talk about and present their relationships within their networks. And this is something that I've been working on now for over a decade in a paper I co-authored with colleagues in 2014 called Talking Ties. So if you're interested in some of the other literature around this topic, you might also like to have a look at that paper, Talking Ties. And in that paper, we look at qualitative methods, rich interviews with people, and visualization, and how people talk about and describe their network relationships. So there's clearly potential here for visualization as a tool to help us in generating data, but also in analyzing data. And so combining network data, these new interactive tools that we're going to present shortly, will help us to understand concepts around notions of similarity and difference, who's like you, who's different from you, and also social status. And Nuria will present visual examples of that in a moment. So just finally, to tell you very briefly the research questions that underpinned the wider project and therefore the data that we used in this paper. So two key research questions. The first one is, at the data collection stage, how does our inductive approach facilitate eliciting concrete data and therefore enhance opportunities for following up those kind of probing follow-up questions on the emerging data around networks and boundary making? And the second question is then, at the analysis stage, how do the combined visual data, but also the narrative data, aid in understanding that process of boundary drawing within people's social networks? So those are the questions, and I'll now hand over to Nuria, who'll tell you how we went about answering those.
Thank you very much, Louise. So now I will present you with the two visual tools. But first, I'm going to give you a quick overview of why and how we designed these tools. So our main idea was that these tools act as visual prompts. So the aim of the tool was not so much to collect visual data, but mainly to provide a cognitive support for the participants and to stimulate narratives among them so that we could collect qualitative data on this drawing of social boundaries. They were designed to be used within a qualitative interview, and they are designed to arrange alters. So many of you might be familiar with different visual tools that are designed to elicit a list of alters, but in this case, we didn't want to use the tools for that. So the tools required a pre-selection of alters. So in our case, we selected alters with a previous interview. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it in a moment. And then once we already had that pre-selection of different network types, we used the tool for asking the participants to arrange the altars in different ways. They are based on simple diagrams, and they are ego-centered, and they are structured but unstandardized. What does this mean? It means that they provide some sort of structure for the data collection, but they are not so fixed as standardized tools. And they are displayed on electronic devices. We use PowerPoint for the tools. So this means that the participants could complete the exercises, those visual exercises, on their own if they wanted. And also, they allow for the screen and voice recording of the whole process of the location and relocation of the network ties, as I will show you. So here we have the first visual tool. It's a similarity scale. As you can see, it is a one-dimensional tool that represents similarity between the participant and different network ties. So basically, this is what we presented to the participant. We told the participant that that little human figure on the bottom left represented themselves, and then that the scale represented similarity and difference between the different network ties and themselves. And therefore, we asked them to locate the 8 preselected altars on the scale. We give flexibility to the participants to start with any network tie that they wanted and to make changes, relocate any altar if they need it, and to place more than one at one single spot. So I've prepared a video to show you an example of how a participant could be using the similarity scale. And basically, this tool was designed to elicit data on different types of social boundaries that the participants may draw or may not draw within their networks, and to discover which are the most salient categories that they use to classify their network ties without giving them these prefix categories ourselves. And, as Louise mentioned, to avoid biasing their answers or to put words into their mouths. And the second visual tool that we designed is a social status diagram, which has the shape of a staircase. And here, the main idea is that this diagram represents social status hierarchy within the participants' network. And as you can see, the number of steps is larger than the number of network ties. In this case, we designed it to have 12 steps. And as you see, 8 altars. And this exercise was divided into 3 parts. In the first part, we asked the participants to locate the 8 network ties according to their social status without giving them a description of what we meant by social status, to give them all that freedom to describe it in their own terms. Then we created a new bubble representing the participant and asked them to locate themselves on the staircase and rearrange any network ties if they needed to, if they felt that they had to do that. And finally, we asked the participants if they thought that society in general would have placed these 9 people, counting themselves too, on the scale differently, and if so, to make the changes accordingly. And the whole time we were asking the participants to just narrate their thoughts. So telling us why they were placing one person at a specific step, above or below others, why they were making changes. So kind of like asking them to talk aloud as they were completing the 2 exercises. And again, here I prepared a small video to show you an example of how someone might be using the tool. And again, we gave them the flexibility to start with any any network member that they wanted, to make changes and to place more than one altar on a specific step. Okay, so we designed these tools and afterwards we applied them within this larger project, patchwork project, as Louise was mentioning. So today we will give you a presentation of several examples of the application of this study. So basically the data was collected between May and August 2023 in the Barcelona urban area, so Barcelona city and 4 more cities around it. And we had a non-probability quota sample of 48 individuals who were socially and ethnically diverse. And those 48 individuals were interviewed twice. So we had first a quantitative interview where we administered the questionnaire to collect quantitative data on the participants' attributes and their network structure, and where we collected data of different network ties and their attributes as well. And then we had a second encounter with them, where we had a qualitative interview where the visual tools were embedded. The visual exercises lasted on average 24 minutes, with the minimum being 11 and the maximum being 45. So here you can kind of have a sense of how they were used differently by the participants. While some of them used them very straightforwardly, located the altars without making many changes. The others really took their time to guide us through the whole process, felt like they had to make different changes. So, they take more time to complete the exercises. So now we will move on to the results. So following those 2 research questions that Louise presented, we will start with the data collection stage. So we argue that the tools that we have designed at the data collection stage are easy to understand and used by participants. So we found that regardless of the age or the educational level of the participants, they were all they all found it quite useful to quite easy to understand the tools and use them. Most of them use the computers themselves to locate the altars, and the ones that maybe were not so familiar with PowerPoint or with the use of computers were just pointing this on the screen where they wanted to locate the different network ties, and then the interviewer was just moving the different altars as according to the instructions of the participant. Then, very importantly, they provided cognitive support to participants to complete a task that might have otherwise been too demanding. They also act as stimulus for narration, meaning that it was the use of the tools that was eliciting some reflections from the participants who were gaining new insights thanks to the visualization of the results. And here we have a couple of examples of what we mean by that. So for example, the first example is from a participant who was just finalizing the exercise with the similarity scale, and she had placed all the women on the left-hand side, so on the similar side of the scale, and all the men on the right-hand side, so the different side of the scale, without realizing that. And she just saw the result of the exercise and she verbalized, oh, look, all the men and all the women, meaning that she was just learning that she had done it that way, kind of like unconsciously. And we have also a similar example from another participant. This was a Roma participant who was also using the similarity scale. And towards the end of the exercise, she also realized that she had placed the different Roma altars on the similar side of the scale. And she mentioned to the participant, I'm left with the 3 Roma because they are closer. Imagine that. And here closer, she meant closer in the scale, not closer as emotionally close ties. Also, we argue that the tools offer great flexibility to the participants to use them in ways that we as the researchers we did not even anticipate. And that at the same time provided the interviewers opportunities for following up on emerging themes, as I will show you with a video in a moment. And finally, at the data collection stage, the tools can elicit unique oral and visual data on categorization and boundary work that would have not been possible to collect without the use of the tools. All right, so here I'm going to show you an anonymized video of the results of how a participant was using the similarity scale. In this case, it was a young woman who was talking about an uncle. The uncle is that green bubble that you see on the screen. And she was trying to express how different this network tie is from her, because he's much older and also because he's very conservative. And she used the tool in a way that we didn't anticipate. So she moved him outside of the scale, as you will see, to show how different he is, but that was only momentaneously. Then she decided to finally place him within the scale. So because we were able to record the whole process of alter location and relocation, we have been able to capture that moment where she was using the tools to provide more emphasis to her narrative by saying we could not be more opposite, we could not be more different. But if we only had the final results of the PowerPoint, we would not have that visual data that we were able to collect. And then I also want to present you with another example. This is from a different participant that was talking in this case about three family members of her, father, mother, and brother. And as you see, she was completing the social status diagram exercise. And here while she was talking about the status of these three family members, she took the chance to describe how it had changed throughout time. So I want to point out that here, we did not ask the participants to talk about changes in time, but we did find that some of the participants decided to do that on their own. So with this, what I'm trying to say is that the tools gave them enough flexibility to, for example, talk about these dynamic changes in their network. And basically what she was saying here, she was saying that 10 years before, their social status was higher up and she was pointing with the cursor. But 2 years before, it was lower, she was pointing. But now, they kind of like have a middle social status. And then, that gave the opportunity to the interviewer to follow up on that theme and ask, this sounds very interesting. Can you tell me a bit more about these changes? What happened? Why did the social status of your family members change? Okay, and moving on to the second research question about how the tools were useful at the data analysis stage. We have found that these tools and the method in general, because they are structured, they allow for both comparisons across the different participants, and also they allow comparisons of the different alters, the different network types of the same participant. They also allow for the comparison between the self-presentation, so that cognitive side that the qualitative data allows us to explore, and the network data, that structured network data that we collected in the previous interview, the quantitative interview. And also, the visualization of the results allow for an identification of different emerging patterns and typologies in the data. And here I'm going to give you these examples that, for example, in the social status exercise, the unstandardization of the tools allowed enough flexibility for the participants to have different approaches to social status hierarchy. So, because we never gave particular definitions of what we mean by similarity and what we mean by social status, this allowed for the emergence of different approaches. Some participants took the whole society as a reference of social status. Other participants took their own personal networks as a reference, and some others took only the 8 selected ties as a reference of the social status. So, for example, the results of this exercise in the left-hand side and the middle one show us participants who took the whole society as a reference, and that's why some parts of the scale are empty. So, for example, the one on the left-hand side, I remember that this person was saying, well, everyone in my network, we all have either a middle social status or a lower one, but the people that are on top, I don't even know them. So that's why that side of the scale is empty. And then we have another example on the right-hand side of a participant who only took as a reference the 8 network ties that we pre-selected. And that's why we located one at the bottom and one on top, and the rest were filling in the rest of the scale. To conclude, we argue that the new method that we created with these visual tools contribute at the intersection of social boundaries and social network research, and that we have made 3 main contributions with our method. And the first one is a technical contribution, because we have been able to create visual tools that are simple, intuitive, and user-friendly. And because they are computer-based, they allowed for the screen and audio recording of the whole dynamic process of alter, location, and relocation, with all the advantages that I mentioned before. The second one is the methodological contribution, because with at the data collection stage, with these tools, we have managed to convey abstract and cognitively demanding concepts of categorization and boundary work without biasing the participant responses by giving them specific prefix categories. And then also at the data analysis stage, as I have mentioned, the tools allow for different comparisons. So interpersonal comparisons and intrapersonal comparisons, comparisons between the qualitative and quantitative data in case, you decide to collect quantitative data, which is not mandatory for the use of the tools. And then also, it allows for the comparison, it allows for the identification of different emerging patterns that we can see with the visual results. And the third key contribution is a conceptual contribution, because with these tools, we have been able to better understand the interaction of the boundary drawing happening from above and from below in the personal networks of the participants, and it also allows for a better understanding of the intersectionality of the different social categories that might be salient for these participants. And then, well, basically, we have presented today the results of how we have applied this method, but we see potential other uses. So, for example, they can be used for whole network studies, not only for ego network studies. They could also be used in purely qualitative social network analysis, because as we have presented today, we have used, for example, made the pre-selection of authors using the quantitative data that we collected in a previous interview. But as I was saying before, this is, not mandatory. Someone that was willing to use the tools only within a qualitative study could, for example, come up with different network name generations questions in a qualitative interview. And then also it allows for that combination with quantitative analysis in the case that someone uses this within a mixed method study, as we did. So that was it from us. Thank you very much. And thank you, obviously, to the organizers. Thank you to the audience. And now we are more than happy to hear from you, hear your feedback and questions.
Thank you so much, Louise and Nuria. That's really a very interesting presentation. Now we have time for Q&A. So as I mentioned a while ago, you can type your questions, comments, thoughts in the chat box, or you can also unmute yourself and ask the questions directly. So can we start? Zoran.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the presentation. I'm not so familiar with such methods. I was just curious, the fact that you mentioned regarding the pre-selection of the authors that are nominated, does this mean at the end you're kind of in the first interview have a selection of authors by the ego and then prepare for each ego then specifically the setting up of your tool, or are you using some, I don't know, nicknames that can be used by various participants? Or it would be great if you could explain this process a little bit more.
Should we answer question by question, or do you prefer to gather a few questions, Rizza?
Yeah, I think we can ask Anya. I think Anya was raising her hand. Is that right? And then afterwards, if there's no other question, we can answer these two questions.
Perfect.
And then after Anya, Jemima. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Okay, so I'm going to go next, if that's okay. First of all, congratulations to Nuria, to Louise, and to the team. It's been a very interesting session. It's a very simple method, yet very engaging, and I very much enjoyed that. I have two questions, but I'm going to stick to one, and it starts with a little story. And the story is that 2 days ago, I've attended a workshop called a Lego series play. So where effectively what you're asked to do is to use the toy, the Lego, to explain some concepts, like maybe reflections on the challenges you experience as a PhD student. And so the principle is that the hand expresses what mind or mouth cannot say. And so in relation to what you have done with the project, I wonder whether there was something that came up in the questionnaire that you started with, and whether there was something in the visual exercise that maybe contradicted it, or maybe made it slightly more or articulated more strongly. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is whether the data you've collected through the interviews or questionnaires seem to have differed through the data you've collected through the visual analysis. Thank you.
And Jemima?
It was a nice presentation, well done. I just want to find out that concerning the authors that were used, since you did not define it, like what was, like most of the decisions were left for the rest participant to decide how you define, like they decided what the definition of each of those things were. For research that are like focused, I'm wondering how you could apply that for like when you're focused on maybe social behavior changes and all that, how you can apply these interactive tools for such research. Thank you.
Thank you, Jemima. And I think last one, Daria, and then we go to, we give the floor to Louise, Nuria, and Alejandro for response.
Yes, thank you. My name is Daria. Thank you very much for your lovely presentation. I'm a sociologist background. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Padua, and I do research on ego-centered network, so it's very interesting to me. Usually, I do quantitative studies. So I have some questions for you. I don't know if I missed the point during your presentation, but first question is about the first part of the questionnaire. So you said that you chose alters before the qualitative part. So did you use a name generator? And also, did you use, for example, name interpreter and name interrelator for the density? And then when you started with the qualitative part, okay, you had 8 alters from 1 to 8. Is there any particular order for this? Was the list that elicited the alters once you made the name generator questions? And once you use this visual tool, can you also, because the main point were about social status and similarity, but once you start, for example, with similarity, I suppose meanwhile, you can ask and then compare data with the quantitative part about the type of alters. Can be age, occupation, any topic, of course, is connected to the research topic. So it can be also a way to explore more, even some dynamics once they build their relationships. What about because you said that we ask information about the structure, so I suppose also about density. Is it possible also with this visual tool asking to ask ego to give information about relationships between alters? Starting from that point, ask more to understand more the dynamic between alters relationships. Sorry, maybe I've been a bit confusing, but they are very interesting point to me, and I would like to use some visual method and integrate with quantitative studies for some focus. So they are my questions for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Daria. And now over to Louise, Nuria, and Alejandro.
Okay, thank you for the 4 questions. Maybe I can start, and Alejandro and Luis, you can, interrupt or add anything, or, just like take over. So we will all try to, answer. So the first question was about the author selection. Yeah, we didn't want to stop too much on this during the presentation. We give a full explanation on the paper, but basically, in the first interview, as we said, we administered a questionnaire, and with this questionnaire, we had different name generators. So this might also answer some of the questions of Daria. So it was a bit like the questionnaire was quite complex. But we ended up with eliciting a list of a maximum of 28 authors per participant. I think it was like between 25 and 28 authors. And we had a lot of name interpreters for those authors. And we also asked if the authors knew each other. So, we had information about their age, their employment status, place of residence, and so on. And of course, closeness with ego, political orientation, so on. And then among those, for each participant, we chose 8. And the way we did it was that because in my PhD thesis, I'm particularly interested in understanding processes of boundary making and categorization based on ethnic and migrant categories. We wanted to select some authors that gave the opportunity for the emergence of different types of social boundaries in the case that those were salient for the participant. So what we did was that we chose two variables per participant. One was always ethnicity or place of origin for the authors and the participant, and the second one was different depending on the participant. Based on the first interview, what we could tell that was like a variable that was relevant for the participant. So, for example, we had like political orientation and so on. And then crossing those two variables, we kind of like tried to complete a table of authors that were similar to the participant and different regarding those two variables, if that makes sense. Like visually, it's a bit more easy to understand, I guess. Well, but that was the way we selected the participants. But with that, I wanted to also add that if someone wanted to use these tools, they could use a different way to select the participants. And that's, of course, depending on what are your research questions and research interests. And then, okay, Louise and Alejandro, if you want to add something, please go ahead, okay?
Okay.
Then the second question was about the quantitative data and qualitative data, and if we found that there were some contradictions between those two. Well, at this point, I'm preparing an article with Miranda Lux, who is one of my PhD supervisors, and we are digging into that. So we are just starting to, analyze the data, the quantitative data and qualitative data, and compare it. So it's a bit too early to give you like a full answer, but it does, like the first preliminary results point out that there are some differences, but we think that it might be quite nuanced. So, for example, I cannot, explain everything right now, but for example, with the issue of migrant and ethnic categories, in the quantitative results, it doesn't seem that it is something that is very salient for participants when they classify their network ties, but it's something that appears quite a lot in the qualitative data. But there's different, there's different dimensions that people mention. Some people might feel similar because they are members of the same ethnic group, while others feel similar because they are both children of migrants, and maybe they were not born in the same country, or their parents were not born in the same country, but they have that similar experience. And those are type of categories that we normally don't explore quantitatively. So with this, I'm just, trying to explain that there's many more nuances that we can explore with that qualitative data and compare. So this is just, to give you some ideas. Hopefully soon we can present more on that. The third one is the issue on, I think I wrote it down, social behavioral changes and how the tools can be applied to study that. I don't know if Louise or Alejandro want to help me with that question.
Well, was that Anna's question? Was that you, Anna?
I think that was Jemima.
Oh, that was Jemima. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Jemima's question. Jemima, would you mind just very briefly repeating your question? Is that okay? I think having a lot of questions together, we're sort of slightly losing the plot. Is Jemima still there?
Jemima, can we hear your question again, please, if you are still there?
Yeah, I'm there. Sorry about that. I think I need to introduce myself first. Maybe that will help. I'm a public health student. I'm a PhD student in public health. So I'm actually taking this social network analysis class, and that's how I got to know about the seminar. Yeah, so that's why my question. And as a researcher, I'm focused on social behavioral changes as regards nutrition, because I'm focused on nutrition. And so that's why I was asking how we could integrate this. So having an idea of my research area could help. And I didn't really understand the concept of the alter initially, but I think it's talking about different variables, let me put it like that, like different, am I right?
Yeah, so alters, that's just technical jargon we use in social network analysis. It basically means the people in your network. So the alters are your relationships.
Your network.
The people in your network, yeah.
Oh, I get it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not grounded in social network analysis. I'm just taking a class. I think we refer to that as nodes. I think nodes and edges or tiles.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's why I was asking that question, that if you did not define, like it's kind of open for people to determine what, like to define these terms that you use, like the social status. You didn't give a specific definition to what it is. So when the participants are responding based on what they think, so there's kind of, everybody's responding to different things. So that's why I was asking how we could apply that. Like they're responding to different things based on that they understand it. So that means they're not responding to a specific question. So it's like everybody's answering different research questions. Let me put it like that.
Yes, it was deliberately open, and that's why we use the steps of the stairs to kind of give that sense of a visual idea of what social status might look like. But people were, and this is the key thing about using these kinds of tools within a qualitative interview, people were not just filling it in sort of silently, they were filling it in and talking about it, which goes back to my paper from 2014 called Talking Ties, where when you're doing a rich, in-depth qualitative interview, so when somebody is placing a person, an alter, in a particular location on the visual tool, they're telling you why they're putting them there. And so we had some very interesting examples in Nuria's research around social status, where somebody said, well, this person could be perceived as quite a high status because they are highly educated. But, so I would put them up here, but because they are from a migrant background, society might be prejudiced against them, and society might perceive them being much further down on the social status. So people actually had quite a nuanced and sophisticated understanding of social status and how it could be interpreted and perceived differently depending on where you were coming from in society. And the tool really helped people to visualize, but then also to talk about that. So I hope that that's made it a little bit clearer, and we should have explained some of that jargon at the beginning. So thank you very much for that, Jemima.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, okay. And then the last question was from Daria.
I think Anna had a question as well. Sorry.
It has been answered, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, it's been answered. Good, good.
I hope so. I tried at least. Yeah.
Anna is my PhD student, so that's why I'm making sure that her question was answered.
Okay. And then, and Daria was asking about the questionnaire, well, and the tools as well. And I already gave some hints on the questionnaire, with the name generators, name interpreters. You were asking also about the order of the authors or the network ties. I didn't really understand if you meant how we presented that to the participant.
I mean, I think that you clarified when you said that you chose from the number of alters, 28 maximum.
Yeah.
So I suppose that then the order was not with any criteria, just the criteria were used to select the 8 and the 20.
Yeah.
Okay, so you answer.
Yeah. And then, exactly as you said, we didn't have a specific order to show the selection to the participants, and we asked them to just start with whomever network tie they wanted. And then you were also talking about or asking about the density and the relationships within the authors. We didn't really design the tool for the participants to talk about the relationships within the authors. I guess, you could try to maybe think about ways that you could use them for that. But then maybe you would need to make a different, like a selection also based on that, because if the authors don't know each other, they don't have ties between them, then that might not be that useful. So then maybe the selection here, would have to be a bit different and so on. But I guess that the good thing about these tools is that they are quite simple, but that gives a lot of flexibility of how you can use them. So I guess that you could use them with that aim.
All right. I think now we can go to some questions in the chat box. If you don't mind, I will read them so that when we record this, so we are recording, and if somebody else would watch it afterwards, I'm not sure if they can see the questions in the chat box. So first is from Rule, a postdoc in science education at Texas A&M University. So he's asking, I'm wondering if this tool is only useful for social status research. I'm currently wrapping up an ego network study examining rural science teachers' improvement in enactment a certain science practice after participating in a technology-mediated professional development. When we did the interview, we showed the participants their sociograms generated from their quantitative surveys, pre-selected by the participants. I'm just wondering how this tool would apply in an ego network study that does not specifically talk about social status like your research did. For instance, my current ego network study, how does this approach differ than that of using sociograms as visual assistance for the interviewees? I think we can settle with that question first, and then I'll go to the next one after the response. Perhaps that will be easier.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if Louise or Alejandro want to help out with this one. Just trying to go back to.
Yeah, I mean, clearly this tool was specifically looking at social status and trying to visualize and understand social status. I think it could be adapted for other kinds of research questions that are asking about different things, because I think that the beauty of this tool is its simplicity, and it uses PowerPoint. You don't need a lot of very complicated platforms in order to apply this tool. And it's the bringing together of a technique to help people to visualize their social ties while talking about them, so that you can both simultaneously see them and hear about them at the same time. And this is different from what you're describing there in your question, where you collected the data and then you went away and you visualized it. And a lot of social network research, especially quantitative social network research, there's a post hoc visualization of a sociogram. But here, the participant themselves is actually in control of the visualization tool. You could see in Nuria's video how they were moving people around and they were making all of those decisions themselves. So it's very much a participant-led tool. So I think for your own research that you're doing in Texas, this kind of technique could be adapted to different kinds of research questions. So we're certainly not saying that it could only be used in relation to social status.
Thank you so much, Louise. And Alejandro also gave us the link to the, if you're interested about the quantitative part of the project, you can check it using the link that Alejandro copied in the text chat box. Okay, so the next question is about intersectional understanding. Okay, so from Yao Carvalho, I hope I pronounced your name properly. You mentioned that the tool allows for an intersectional understanding of the social categories emerged in the diagram. I wonder, how did that come up in the participants' narratives? Do you ask them specific questions about alters' identities or social locations?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for that question. So we did not ask them specific questions about the author's identities, for example, but it was like the way this intersection of different categories came up in their narratives. Because as we explained, we didn't give the participants specific descriptions of similarity, right? So we were not interested in one dimension of similarity. So in that way, the participants had to think about the different dimensions that were silent for them, and choose one specific location, for example, for the similarity scale, and then they were trying to explain how they made sense of those different intersections of the different social categories. So, for example, I have in mind an example of a young participant who was talking about her brother. They were both young people who were born in Spain. Their parents were from China. So she was talking. Talking about the brother, and she was placing him on the social status diagram. And she was mentioning all these intersection of the different social categories that she had in mind. She was saying like, well, I choose this specific spot because, he's a young male, he's straight, he has a good job in terms of career, he's doing well, but he will always have his Asian ethnicity. That's something that is going to be always there for him. So with those type of narratives, you could really see how participants were, talking about the intersection of different boundaries, different categories. And that's more that it came more from their narratives rather than from our questions. It came from the combination of how we designed the tools and, the narratives of the participants, I would say.
Thank you, Nuria. I think that's the beauty of keeping it open and not defining it so that the participant themselves are the ones narrating and thinking about this particular concepts. Okay, next question from Anna Piazza. Could you elaborate on how you determine the threshold for nominating authors? And what guided your decision about the appropriate number of authors to include in each ego network?
Okay, so here we were at the beginning. I remember discussing, how many authors we should select, and we ended up with the conclusion that 8 was a right number. And actually, in the paper, we recommend that if someone wants to use the tool, it's probably best to have a selection of between 6 and 8 authors, because we think that below 6, it's maybe too little in terms of, the diversity that you can have in those network ties, and below and above 10, sorry, it might be a bit too much for the participant, because this is quite cognitively demanding, right? And even though the tools are simple and are, precisely designed for that, maybe more than 10, having to talk about more than 10 network times at the same time, it will be too much. And well, I think we already elaborated quite a lot on how we nominated the authors. So probably that question hopefully has been answered.
Thank you, Nuria. And then the last question was about the what was used for the visual screen recording, and Anya said that they mentioned PowerPoint in the beginning. So yes, and we have a discovery here that you can record your presentation in the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so I think we're coming up on time, so I want to be respectful of everyone's schedules. Let's take final questions, probably. Any last question? I think to close and to give our speakers last points. The method was developed within a study focused on ethnic boundaries in Barcelona. How transferable do you think it is to different social or cultural contexts? And I guess what I wanted to ask is for everyone, and what would researchers need to think carefully about before adopting these tools?
Mm-hmm. That's
So
a good
I think the last thing that you want to say to everyone before adopting the tools that you've developed.
Yes.
What they have to keep in mind, and also based on your learnings when you applied it?
Yes. Well, I guess that I would say that these tools are quite flexible, and as we have, been describing, they can be probably adapt to many different types of studies. But I do think that researchers that want to use these tools need to think well about what are the research aims and how to best adapt the tools to their own research aims. And they also might need to think about who are their participants, because this is something that we also touch upon on the article. And of course, in a presentation, you don't have time to explain everything. But the tools can also be adapted for different types of participants, but you would need to think a little bit more about that. So, for example, in terms of participants who cannot read or write, we use names, right, inside of the little bubbles. So these tools would need to be adapted for those participants. And for example, we didn't use that, but we thought that something that people could use with participants that cannot read is that maybe choose little avatars for the different people, for the different network ties, so that this way they are more, accessible for different types of participants. And also, of course, in terms of, different participants from diverse cultural backgrounds, they will maybe understand the tools differently. They will maybe use the tools differently. So that's something that would need to be taken into account, I guess.
Thank you, Nuria. Louise?
Yeah, I was just going to say it would be very interesting actually if people did try this tool in a very different cultural context or to answer a very different kind of research question, and then to come back to us and let us know, and we could compare what it looks like and how it can be adapted in different ways. So I think Alejandro, I don't know if Alejandro is still here, but he was very much involved in developing the tool. So I think he'd be very curious as well to see how it could be used in different kinds of research projects. So maybe somebody will pick it up today and then get back in touch with us and let us know.
And that's the exciting part of it. Definitely. Um, Okay, so I think on behalf of Nuria, Luis, Alejandro, Snag, EMCR, thank you so much to all of you for joining us and for such thoughtful engagement throughout. Don't forget the article in the link in the chat box. It's open access. Check it out. Alejandro also shared another article based on the project. Before we close, I also like to take a moment to mention early and mid-career researcher of social network, EMCR. Along with Snag, we co-hosted today's seminar. So if you're an early or mid-career researcher working in or around social network analysis, the EMCR is a wonderful community to be a part of. Of course, I'm biased, and I warmly encourage you to find out more and consider joining us. You can find details on the EMCR website, and if you know other colleagues who might be interested, whether or not they attended today, please do pass the word along, and also the articles. Now, it's been a real pleasure moderating today. Take care, everyone, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much.